So I think we are ready to get started. I want to welcome everybody today to the webinar. We have a lot of exciting news and information to discuss. It's very exciting, I think, that this is happening now. Many of us on this call have been working and trying to figure out the complexities around broadband and what it will take to get it into our communities or to improve the broadband we already have. And I think today we have a great announcement and a lot of information. I want to just tell everybody or ask everybody to be patient with us over the next couple of years, I guess, or to be patient with each other. This is new programming. It's exciting. It's new funding. It's new programming for most of our governments. And it's not always going to be perfect. We're going to do it better every time we do it again. And we're going to have a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years to make investments and to put strategies together and to work together. So I think we all know why it's important. It's really become economic survival for our communities. And it's going to be a great injection of new energy and new opportunities. So with that, I want to get to our host. I want to introduce, earlier this year, our Governor, John Bel Edwards, appointed a new, the first executive director for the Office of Broadband and Connectivity for the state. And Louisiana really is on the front end of this and being very aggressive. So it's exciting to introduce today to you Veneeth Iyengar. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Veneeth. He has a really strong history of working with communities and working with businesses and really trying to make things happen in revitalization and in new opportunities. So let me give you a little bit of his background. So he is the first executive director for broadband development and connectivity for the state. And he has been tasked with coordinating efforts between the federal, state, and local leaders to eliminate the digital divide in Louisiana by 2029. Big job. Thank you, Veneeth. He comes out of Baton Rouge. He was the city parish executive for the mayor there, and he was focused on economic development. During 2019 and 2020, his work resulted in the best year in history in economic development projects in the parish in terms of CapEx, projects secured, and diversity of projects. He was asked by Governor John Bel Edwards to co-chair his Resilient Louisiana Healthcare Task Force, which he was able to really work with a lot of executives in a cross section of the state with that experience. Previous to his time as a public servant, he worked in the venture capital space, working again with a lot of large companies. Veneeth was named a 2018 40 Under 40 in Baton Rouge by the Baton Rouge Business Report, named a 2020 Leadership Louisiana recipient by the Council for Better Louisiana, elected to the board of Pennington Biomedical Research Foundation in 2019, and was named chairman for Innovation Catalyst as an Evergreen Investment Fund in 2019. He received his master's in science finance from Johns Hopkins, his bachelor's in science and economics from Purdue, and he grew up in Baton Rouge, and he's a proud Louisianian. And again, I want to say thank you, Veneeth. You've taken on a huge job, and hopefully we're all here to support you so that we can get rid of that digital divide by 2029. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take this.
Well, thank you, Monique, and thank you all for hosting me today. And you know why I feel really personally bullish that we could solve this problem by 2029 is singularly when we think about Team Broadband. It isn't just our office that's focused on broadband. It's all the 101 attendees that's on this call that have a direct role that you can play to affect broadband activities, whether it comes to access, affordability, or literacy. And so we've been, my team and I, over the last couple of months, I'm sure you guys have all seen me in and around the state of Louisiana. We have visited 20 parishes, if not more, since March 29th. And unequivocally, there is such alignment across the board when it comes to all things broadband that, again, we feel really bullish that we are going to solve this problem by 2029. I know everyone here is going to hear about the latest and greatest on Gumbo, which we're going to provide some high-level details and directional timing on the program itself. But what I wanted to do was to spend a few minutes for those that may or may not have seen this presentation, to provide a couple of minutes on a grounding level and how we're framing the challenges around broadband, which isn't just an access problem. And I think everyone knows that it isn't just an access problem, but it's an affordability problem as well. It's also a literacy problem, all of which are intertwined and all of which impact each other in one way or another. So, Rachel, if you could go to the next slide, or the next slide. So if we start to frame out the sizing of our problem, and I mentioned earlier, it's the three pillars: access, affordability, and literacy. If you start to take a look at access, we're talking about greater than 450,000 households, representing close to 1 million to Louisianians that lack 25 by 3 speeds. We're talking about 43.6% of these households that can afford it, 47% of whom are African American and Hispanic household members. And we're talking about then 462,000, or as many as 462,000 adults between 18 and 64 that lack the basic digital literacy skills to understand what to do with broadband. So wherever I am throughout the state, I'm often saying, while the focus is on access, I can unequivocally address the access issue if I address the affordability issue in a community and people still don't understand what to do with broadband and why is it important, then your uptake is going to be low. And it doesn't really do its job at the end of the day. And so that's why digital literacy, which are efforts that we're really helping to focus and work with the Board of Elementary Secondary Education and the Commissioner Kim Hunter-Reid, we're working on a number of triangulated efforts around literacy to attack that problem. Now, on the flip side, though, for the first time, and Monique alluded to this earlier in the presentation, we're actually coming out of a position of strength. And if you start to look at historic investments that providers have made, whether it's a Lumen or AT&T or Cox or whomever, right? If you start to look at the fiber that's been laid throughout the state of Louisiana, and you look at some of the infrastructure rankings, that's been published by U.S. News and World Report, we rank in the top 18 when it comes to gigabit infrastructure. So that's a check mark for Louisiana. When you start to look at the rankings, when you combine wired low price plans, broadband access, and speeds, we rank 33. Again, not catastrophic, but we have a great starting point for which to build and accelerate our efforts to addressing both the access, affordability, and literacy. If you could go to that next slide, please. So why is this important? And Monique alluded to it. It's singularly for a bunch of parishes, if not rural parishes, is singularly the number one, number two, number three economic development driver in these places, in these towns, right? In these parishes. There's research done by Purdue University that for every dollar that's invested, regardless if it's access, affordability, or literacy, you get a 4 times multiplier. There are now, for the first time in a long time, a significant different pots of money that's focused on addressing this issue, both again, access and affordability, and now literacy. You now have parishes, towns, and villages that can use their American Rescue Plan money on infrastructure, water, sewer, and broadband. But within broadband, you can use it for infrastructure. You could use it for digital literacy programs, affordability. You can even use it to identify consultants to help with pre-development costs. And it's interesting that on the July 14th guidance from the American Rescue Plan, they now allow for municipalities to use their ARP money as loans, low cost, low interest loans to providers to help them scale broadband services. So that's the next sort of mechanism that allows for parishes to use their American Rescue Plan money. Now, you look at what the infrastructure bill looks like that's pending in DC. Louisiana may get close to $1 billion from the federal government through the infrastructure bill, on top of the $180 million that our state's going to receive to address broadband issues. And so if you combine RDOF, the $342 million, plus the 180, plus whatever we plan to get from the infrastructure bill. That's why we all feel confident that we can solve this problem when it comes to access by 2029. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly talk about some tactical solutions, right? On the infrastructure side, talked about the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund. And for those that are familiar with the program, that's if you can indulge me for a few minutes, but what the FCC did last year was they recognized that rural broadband was a problem. And so they created an effort called the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund, RDOF is the acronym. And through a reverse auction bidding mechanism, they are awarding 13 companies in the state of Louisiana $342 million to build out high-speed broadband. We're talking about greater than 120 speeds to over 175,000 households in the state of Louisiana. Now, the obligation that those 13 companies have made to the FCC is that they have to build their network within a six-year period. Where they are in the process as of today, right, Tuesday, July 20th, is all of these companies are currently having their long forms, which are their technical forms, evaluated by the FCC, which also includes an evaluation of their financial strength as a company in order for them to effectively build and scale solutions in the areas that they say that they're going to build. And so that's a process that did not have to come through our office, but where we're engaged is trying to make sure that we continue to push and understand from the 13 companies who are going to receive this money, what their game plans are, and where we need to come in if necessary to work with them to help expedite some of their efforts over the next couple of years. So their obligation to the FCC, 6-year build time. At the end of 3 years, their obligation is to build 40% of where they say they're going to build. At the end of 4 years, 60%. At the end of 5 years, 80%. And at the end of 6 years, 100%. So that's the Rural Digital Opportunities Program, the fund. The second is House Bill 648 that Representative Desautels led, working with our office, working with a number of different stakeholders, many of whom are on this call, which is now Act 477. Governor Edwards signed that bill on June 29th. And what we're currently doing with Act 477, which I'm going to refer to the Gumbo bill as Act 477, is we're actively drafting the rules for the program. We're also currently drafting the scoring criteria and matrix. The bill, or if not the act, allowed us and gave our office discretion on looking at some best examples and best practices from other states in terms of constructing what we think are going to be effective scoring criteria and scoring matrix, to making sure that the money and the financial resources that we're getting, which are sort of once in a lifetime, once in a generational kind of money, is going to the areas that are completely unserved. And so we're drafting the rules, we're coming up with the scoring matrix. Our goal is to release the rules and scoring matrix sometime over the next couple of weeks, so sometime in mid-August. And our timeline then is to open up formally the grant program in October. So stay tuned, because mid-August is when I think the folks will receive for the first time the scoring criteria, the rules, and the application questions. And then that'll give folks sufficient enough time between August and October 1 to start to look at putting together those partnerships and doing whatever they need to be doing with the providers. And then the application window is going to be open between tentatively October 1st and October 31st. Our goal is to then make those awards sometime in the first half of January. So expedited timeline. I think stay tuned, and I'm happy to answer any questions to the degree that I can while we're still in the rulemaking process at the end of the session. And then the third item that I wanted to talk about from an infrastructure perspective is American Rescue Plan. In fact, I'm going to often reference that because, again, we're specific to Act 477 Gumbo. Parishes and municipalities, for the first time, and with the help of Monique and many of the folks that are on this call, police, jury, LMA, and so on and so forth, I think we recognize that municipalities and parishes, towns, and villages have to play an exceedingly important role in terms of really shaping what their broadband future is going to look like. And so municipalities can use some of their funding through the America Rescue Plan, again, as an option to serve as a local match to any project that applies to Gumbo without without fear or triggering of the Fair Market Act, which currently exists today in Louisiana. And so that's the America Rescue Plan. Now, if you were to combine RDOF plus Gumbo, and if both work in the way we anticipate it working, then what you may see over the next 4 to 6 years is $560 million invested to impact 300,000 households. And I mentioned in the previous slide, we're talking about 450,000 or so households in the state of Louisiana that lack the 25/3 speeds. I think between Gumbo and between the RDOF program, if we can solve close to 70-75% of the problem, then we're well on our way of hitting those 2029 deadlines. If you go to the next slide, please. On the affordability piece, affordability, of course, continues to be top of mind, not only to the governor. In my conversation with the governor last Wednesday, we brought up affordability as a major barrier, gating and a barrier to entry for a lot of folks to understand how to best utilize and avail of broadband. And so since May 12th, we've aggressively pushed out, and we've worked with all of you on the phone or on the Zoom to push out the emergency broadband benefit program. Since May 12th, we've had 107,857 folks already received temporary relief between $50 and $75 a month in your broadband bills. That puts us in the top 12, top 13 in the state, in the country, in terms of people accessing this program. There's still significant amounts of financial resources available through this emergency broadband benefit program. So my ask of all of you on this call is continue to push, continue to remind, and continue to tell folks about this effort in this program, because this money is first come, first serve. And I think we could significantly get more Louisianians to benefit from this program. The second is Emergency Connectivity Fund. So my colleague, Carol Mosley, who many of you guys know, have been actively working with a lot of the school districts, school boards, with regards to the Emergency Connectivity Fund and their application deadline, which I believe is going to be coming up very, very soon. And again, I mentioned America Rescue Plan because, again, that is an opportunity, for instance, for parishes, towns, and villages to identify a subpopulation which are struggling to afford basic internet, and that's where you can use that money for those purposes. Next slide, please. And then digital literacy. This is where I think we can be really creative in our approach to helping solve some of the challenges when it comes to literacy. Just like broadband, just like affordability, literacy is also a very localized challenge that exists, right? Whether you live in East Carroll Parish or Cameron Parish, whether you live in, Beauregard Parish or some other place, whether it's broadband, which is a localized issue, it's going to provide a localized, and it's going to need localized solutions, or even digital literacy. This is where I think we could come up with some interesting partnerships between anchor institutions that exist in your community, whether it's the local library, whether it's a local school, whether it's a local community college, whether it's the local ag extension office. There are some constructs that we can work on together to identify the number of folks that we have that data, a number of folks that are digitally not literate in some of these locations, but also identify the kinds of programmatic aspects to get them to be digitally literate over the next couple of years. And so we're actively working with Commissioner Reed and Superintendent Cade Brumley to addressing that. In fact, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the North Star program, which is cited as a best practice in terms of addressing digital literacy challenges. It's a program out of Minnesota. The Board of Regents has a contract with them. And so I'm meeting with some of the folks leading that effort from the commissioner's office on Friday to understand how we can work together to push out that program in areas throughout the state. Next slide. So I think I mentioned RDOF briefly. If you go to the next slide, Rachel, wanted to share what this map looks like in terms of where these pockets of areas are going to be covered by these 13 winners on the left. If you look at the two largest groups that will receive RDOF funding, the areas in blue and the areas of green, the folks that are in blue are they're a company called Connexon, and their business model is to partner exclusively with co-ops that are often in the best position, especially in Northeast Louisiana, to service the unserved needs in those areas. We have spent time with the three large co-ops, Concordia, Claiborne, Northeast, and they are all motivated to working with Connexon in some capacity to addressing some of their challenges when it comes to unserved areas in that part of the state. Segna McGarry is the second largest winner of RDOF. It's a company that's based out of the North Shore here in Louisiana. And so their obligation to the FCC is to build fiber to the homes. And so they're often traveling throughout the state, meeting with parish leaders where their concessions are, and they're working with parish leaders to further understand what they can do to help drive more broadband penetration in some of those areas that are considered unserved. SpaceX has areas in the south, the middle, northern part of the state as well. Their model is really to focus on areas that are very, very remote. So if you look at Plaquemines Parish, if you look at areas where population density is significantly less, I think SpaceX and their business model, based on what we've read and based on conversations we had, is best suited in less dense, in areas that are very spread out, and so on and so forth. So we're actively having conversations with these 13 companies. I did mention it to the governor last Wednesday in my meeting that we'd like to have a conversation with all 13 of these companies, with him involved, and we're setting that up over the next couple of months. Next slide. Whenever we go to parishes or towns, or even that matter villages, what I wanted to do was just to share a couple of slides that helps to capture specific data focused on access and affordability and accessibility and literacy. And I think part of what we want to do as an office is start to provide specific data for parish leaders to then make their own decisions on what they think makes best sense to help provide that alleviation of their challenges when it comes to the digital divide. And so if you go to the next slide, Rachel, I'm going to give you an example. In Caldwell Parish, we were there, I think a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And if you start to look at Caldwell Parish and you look at the entirety of the parish, what we're typically providing is data, and we're looking at technologies, ADSL, cable, fiber, fixed wireless. We're purposely not looking at satellite. But what we wanted to do was just to understand and provide a landscape as to the number of providers that are in that area that are providing 25x3 based off certain census blocks and based on regions. Now, a lot of this data is coming from a June 2020 FCC map. I think we all recognize that the map is not a 100% solution. It's a good starting point, but it's not absolute. We were on a call yesterday with some former FCC officials, and I think Monique, you were on the call, and I think Rachel, you may have been on the call, but the FCC is actively working on trying to address this mapping effort. But at least what we want to share and what we're willing to provide to parishes, should they ask us, is this kind of level data that at least provides a starting point on those areas that are served, unserved, by how many providers and at what speeds. If you could go to the next slide. Then that first slide talks at a macro level from an FCC perspective. This is RDOF, and again, this is data that we could provide based on request and ask. And this RDOF data, again, looks at Caldwell Parish, looks at the number of parishes or the number of areas and census blocks that are covered in purple by Connexon and by red by SpaceX. So in Caldwell Parish, 2 providers expected to provide high-speed broadband to 2,731 households, again, over a 6-year period. And so for Gumbo, the bill does not allow for gumbo funds to go into areas that are already receiving funding. So for instance, we can't go into the areas that are in purple or into the red. So then the idea then is for any applicant that wants to look at non-RDOF areas, so these areas in white in and around the parish, those providers can target those census blocks, identify those addresses, and apply for gumbo funding for our program. Next slide. And then on the affordability issue, I think this is really important data because it also talks about what we think would be an appropriate cost of internet service per month, right? If you start to look at the economics of median household income in Caldwell Parish, we're talking about 37,691. 20% of those folks have extreme levels of poverty. We're developing a parish by parish approximate breakdown, or at least on a zip code basis, what we think are the number of FCC EBB beneficiaries, along with the number of folks that could benefit from that program. And what we have listed down here is the amount of America Rescue Plan money that they can either spend on infrastructure, access, and affordability. And so in conversations that we've had, not only with Caldwell Parish, but Grant Parish, LaSalle, there's strong interest in providing this kind of data. Join us. Stop. Someone's so anyway, so with that, I think this is important data also to provide in terms of the context and the level of dollar amounts that could be spent on either, again, infrastructure, affordability, or literacy. If you go to the next slide, Rachel. And then on the last slide, and I wanted to present this before I take on any questions, literacy. And I think I mentioned that, especially in Caldwell Parish. Now, this number is based off, and this is a caveat, this number is based off a National Center for Education and Statistics data analysis from 2018, which relied on data from 2012. Okay, again, it's not meant to be the absolute final starting point, but it's meant to be a starting point in general. When we called the National Center for Education and Statistics, they recognize that obviously the data is old, and they're right now in the process of updating that 2012 numbers to reflect sort of the new realities. What you're beginning to see when it comes to broadband in general is that, and you guys are fully aware of this, broadband before the pandemic was an issue anyone hardly talked about. Now everyone's talking about it, which also means that everyone's scrambling to get updated data. And so to the degree that we can approximate what we think is the problem statement from a quantitative perspective on a per parish basis, we will, with the caveats that it may not be absolutely accurate, but at least it gives a good starting basis of addressing some of these issues around access, affordability, and literacy. With that, Rachel, I think I'm done, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Veneeth, before we go to question and answers, there's just a couple of things I wanted to address. Kate, if you could go back to the beginning slides. Yes. So I just want to recognize that this event was hosted in concert with Louisiana Planning and Development Districts throughout the state, LAPDD districts that you can see here, and your parishes and the regions that they're represented by are actively stepping up to the plate to help facilitate some of these conversations and coordinate, and then also position themselves as a technical resource. So if you ever need assistance outside of the Veneeth office, feel free to reach out to one of these points of contacts, and we can help you guide through some of the conversations that need to happen in order to make critical decisions. Next slide, Cade. So we can't conclude this presentation without also recognizing the tremendous work that has been done by Delta Regional Authority and the leadership of Leslie Durham. Thank you, Leslie, if you're listening. I think Louisiana is positioned well, I guess nationally, because of some of the broadband mapping that has already underway and has already taken place. And Kate, if you can just click on the speed test results. I would encourage everybody, this is an innovative online crowdsourcing platform. A lot of states are migrating to this sort of, I guess, innovative mapping effort to ensure that we are validating the speeds that people are actually receiving in the communities. I think this is one critical way that we will all help to inform some of the decisions that need to take place so that we can illustrate the actual speeds that people are getting within their respective parishes. So as you can see here, the speed test results, we just encourage you to go to that link that's shared in the presentation, and the presentation will be made available afterwards to you, all of the participants. But I would just encourage you to go take the speed test as many times as you can and as many different places as you can. The goal of this is to get a representative sample, which I believe GeoPartners has said it's about 10% of the population, to ensure that you're getting the speeds, the actual speeds in each of those locations. So Kate, if you can go back to the.
And just to piggyback off what Rachel said, I don't want to belabor how important this initiative was, that Leslie has been working on for the last couple of years. The speed test is going to be one of the mapping indicators that's going to tell us where to direct some of these financial resources from GUMBO. So it is incumbent upon all of you guys to continue to, as Rachel said, get the word out, push out the speed test. In fact, the mayor of Stonewall in Louisiana, which is a town just south of Shreveport, he, for instance, is putting together 5,000 flyers and is going to be distributing that speed test information everywhere. We were in LaSalle Parish, and their economic development folks slipped in a little flyer or a little information flyer or whatever in their report cards for students, right? And so they're going to do newspaper ads. So it's critically important that folks submit data from the speed test. And for folks that don't have service, that's okay. Just indicate when you do that service that there is not service available at a specific address, and we'll capture that data. We have just over 7,000 people that have submitted the speed test, and as Rachel said, we need those numbers to be significantly higher over the next couple of months. So.
And the LAPDD and planning districts will periodically be doing major campaign pushes to encourage participation in the speed test. So I just want to also share that. And Kate, if you could go to the last slide. Last year, LAPDD, the planning districts that they represent, the association, received an award through the Economic Development Administration to do significant, and Kate, if you could switch to the outreach mapping and deployment slide, to do significant work in the communities. And what I would say is that we're at a point where there's significant outreach that needs to be conducted just on the Broadband 101 conversations. And the planning districts will undertake that effort to help educate community leaders, stakeholders, and those interested parties in the communities. And so if you need that information available to your constituents, feel free to reach out to one of the planning district designees that is listed into this presentation. And then just as we mentioned a little bit earlier, in concert with DRA, we will be conducting the significant mapping through the broadband speed test, and then help utilize, take that speed test and create some informed decision making at the local level, at the regional level, and also at the state level, as Veneeth said, with the GUMBO program. And then also just want to mention that planning district representatives will also be available to identify throughout the region's different priorities, or priorities that might vary by region. Obviously, an urbanized area will have different priorities than maybe ag land. And so we want to ensure that the priorities of each of the regions are communicated in a way that we can develop, potentially long-term broadband deployment plans. And then also the planning districts will be made available to offer technical assistance as needed for parishes and communities that require it as such. So with that, Veneeth, I think we'll go to Q&A. And what I'll do is I'll read the question aloud, and then Veneeth, if you could just answer those questions as appropriate. So the first question that was submitted by Heather is, this is rather specific about gumbo as an opportunity. If a municipality has existing conduit and some services provided, would that community be eligible for its unserved neighborhoods to apply?
Yeah, so in the Act, there's a section in the Act which talks about local government units which already are providing a covered service. Those can certainly apply for gumbo funds, right? The idea is if they're already providing a covered service to either businesses or households, and I think the deadline was by July 1st of this year, so a couple of weeks ago, then they are considered an eligible applicant for gumbo. So with Vidalia, Heather, I'll need to understand specifically what they're doing in Vidalia in terms of what kind of services they're providing and to whom they're providing, if any, and I can certainly circle back.
The next question submitted by Patricia is, how does one obtain emergency broadband benefit and where do you apply?
I will send a flyer. It's a really quick, easy 2-minute process to determine eligibility. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program is to address folks that are, I think, 135% below the poverty line, that are on SNAP, free and reduced lunch, that have experienced a catastrophic loss of income due to the pandemic. And so there's a flyer, and I will send that flyer to you, Rachel, to send to Patricia and et cetera. What I've been told is that the flyer is really quick and easy, takes a couple of minutes to fill out. Individuals can fill that out. Of course, the providers can help with that process as well. The other thing from that program is that even if you have a household of 4 and one of those household members is eligible, then that household is eligible. So it doesn't have to have everyone eligible for that in order to qualify for that EBB program. But we'll follow up after this and send a flyer.
All right, and the next question is, can the PowerPoint presentation be made available to attendees?
Yes.
So we will post the PowerPoint presentation to Plan Acadiana website, and we will also distribute it to the planning districts to disseminate accordingly. And Veneeth, you can probably make it available on your website as well.
Okay.
The next question is from Eric. What are some examples of PPPs proposed?
Yeah, so Eric, it's a really good question. So a PPP can be a public-private partnership, could be developed whether to address access or affordability or literacy. So so when it comes to specifically our GUMBO program, and GUMBO just is an acronym for Granting Unserved Municipalities Broadband Opportunities. So we felt GUMBO was the appropriate name for a program in Louisiana. So it's really an acronym. But you could see when it comes to addressing access, where you have a provider, and by the way, in the law, GUMBO Act, the provider has to do a local match of 20% at minimum, right? So you could see a $5 million project where they come in at minimum 20%, so that's $1 million. You may get the municipality or the parish that decides, hey, I want to chip in 5% of that $5 million, which is $250,000. You may get the school board that says, hey, I want to chip in $100,000, right? And then we take care of the rest. So that's an example of different groups coming together to addressing the access issue. The same thing on the affordability issue. Once we've identified, based on a zip code basis, how many folks are struggling with affording basic internet, there you can work with, again, your local parish and municipality that could use some of their American Rescue Plan money to help fund some of these affordability programs. But you can also work with nonprofits. You can work with your local economic development organizations to bring together the business community to help address some of those affordability gaps. In the same manner on the literacy side of things. And that's where community college could partner with, let's say, an LSU Ag Extension office that could partner with the municipality, that can partner with the school board, again, to addressing issues around literacy based off underlying data that we could provide on how many people are what we considered not digitally literate.
All right, next question from Andrew. How can groups like AARP, who represent rural parts of the state, collaborate with your office to assist this effort, and whether it's outreach or education or other opportunities?
No, I think AARP, frankly, is one of the better positioned nonprofits throughout, not only in the state of Louisiana, but also throughout the country, to help us address these issues around digital divide. Because if you start to think about the pandemic itself, and let's say we think about Louisiana in general, and we use I-10 as sort of that demarcation between North and South, North Louisiana and South Louisiana. North Louisiana is losing population. And most of the people that are leaving North Louisiana are either coming to South Louisiana for job opportunities or leaving the state. And so Louisiana, just like many other states in this country, are rapidly aging. And so when you suddenly told folks that are, let's say, 60s and beyond, that they have to suddenly get on the computer to do a telehealth visit, that suddenly that they had to pay their bills online, that suddenly you have to tell them you need to get on some sort of video chat or a Zoom call to talk to your folks or to talk to family, it presented a significant number of challenges and problems, right? And so I think where the AARP can come in, and we'd love to work and collaborate with you, is how do we continue to do a couple of things? How do we continue to advocate some of the things and initiatives that we're pushing, which is the speed test? How do we start to identify certain parishes or communities to address issues around telehealth, right? From both an education perspective, but perhaps applying for some grants to address and partner with the local primary care facility to address telehealth. And then third is how do we partner with the local library and some of those anchor institutions addressing literacy. And I think that population, unless you have a kid in your household that serves as your local geek squad, right? Best Buy Geek Squad or Genius Bar from Apple, really becomes a challenge for those older adults in terms of their adoption of technology in rural areas. So we're happy to talk to you guys.
Next question from Robert. Does the state plan to participate in the NTIA mapping information?
So yes, I mean, to the extent that we can, we'll participate with NTIA for a number of different things. In fact, we actually have a call with the NTIA at I think 2:30 this afternoon to talk about a number of best practices that are occurring from other states. There is an agreement, a data sharing agreement, an information agreement that we're going to hopefully sign soon, called MBAM, which is with the NTIA, so that we can start to share much more granular data on a per parish and per community level. But yes, to your question, Robert, we'll continue to work in close partnership with the NTIA, but also in partnership with the FCC.
Next question, have you noticed large variances in speed test results between MLab and other speed tests like UCLA?
Yeah, so Robert, I did get your email. So I did get your email. And first of all, thank you for submitting multiple tests. There is going to always be a variation, right, between MLab, UCLA, and our speed test. The DRA speed test is actually powered by MLab. That's okay. I think, again, every single data that we get that shows consistently where those areas are unserved as opposed to served is going to be beneficial, knowing that there are going to be variances in terms of the time of day that you take that test, the bandwidth speeds that are occurring at that time of day, and so on and so forth. So I think it's perfectly okay that MLab and UCLA and others are not going to have necessarily the same exact data, but as long as we have an approximation of where those unserved areas are, then that satisfies our requirements and directing funds from our office.
Next question from Bridget. How would we request our map of proposed FCC provider data at the parish level?
Just email me and then we could get that to you.
And I think that also applies to sharing statistics for homes with service and household earnings with each parish.
Yes.
Last question, Plaquemines Parish would like to apply for the NTIA grant. Will you please share the information you gained from the call this afternoon with
So
NTIA?
Patricia, the answer is I'm happy to share, but I know Monique, I think you and Rachel, actually some of the parishes are already applying for that NTIA infrastructure grant. So what I would try to do is lean on the APC, the Acadiana Planning Commission, to get their perspective and experience in terms of that grant, whose deadline is August 17th. But also happy to send you a couple of webinars from that from NTIA to help provide some clarity on that grant program.
Okay. And with that, it concludes the Q&A if there's no one else. Any last closing remarks or thoughts that you would like to share, Veneeth?
No, that's it. Look, I think we're excited. As Monique said, we've actually come a long way since first recognizing 2 years ago. It was actually, I think, August 29th that Governor Edwards, through an executive order, created the Broadband for Everyone in Louisiana Commission. And since that time, we have moved pretty expeditiously to try to come up with solutions and tactics to accommodate the needs for all when it comes to broadband. And so I think for the first time in a long time, and this is, as Monique said, this is a work in progress. So, we're going to roll this program out. We'll see how it goes. If we have to make any modifications or changes, we'll deal with that, at that point. But I think for the first time, co-ops and municipalities can participate in this program. School boards can participate in this program. And I think based on conversations that we had with all of you guys, with LMA, police jury, I think people feel somewhat in a good shape right now. And, really hats off to all of you for really being aligned with trying to address this digital divide issue, which we're going to solve again by 2029, if not sooner. So thank you for hosting.
All right, thank you. That concludes this webinar.
Thank you.